Hey everybody, welcome back to Cannoli's Canvas. Today we're going to talk about how I knew I was an alcoholic, and I'm going to use the clinician guide of how they would diagnose it. If you went to a therapist's office or something, how they would diagnose it. There's 11 questions or scenarios or categories that they would ask you to kind of relate to your life, and you're kind of looking at it from the last 12 months. So if you've experienced these things and you can identify these things in the last 12 months, you count a point for each one, and at the end we'll sum up the total and I'll tell you what the clinical test says that means for you. I'm specifically going to give my own personal experiences of my responses to these questions, or my answers to these questions. And my answers to these questions would vary depending on if we were talking about early in my alcoholic career or later toward the end where I got sober. So the clinical name for alcoholism is alcohol use disorder. And let's get into the criteria and the examples that I can give for you. Before I get started, let me just say I am not a psychiatrist, a psychologist. I am not a doctor. I am just somebody that suffers from alcoholism, and I am coming up on my 19th year sober from alcohol. So that's the experience that I have with this. But if you feel like you have a problem with alcohol, please reach out. I will put some links in the description below to resources. You should definitely talk to a doctor or a medical professional if you feel like you are suffering from alcohol use disorder. The withdrawal, the detox from alcohol can be severe and life-threatening. So please do not just quit abruptly on your own. You need to talk to a professional about it. You at least need to go to an AA meeting and talk to another alcoholic about it, or just talk to another alcoholic about it that has recovered. The first situation is that the amount of alcohol consumed, or the time in which you plan on consuming the alcohol, you say in your mind is one thing, but then that time gets extended, or that quantity gets extended. For myself, one drink was never enough. I drank until the alcohol was gone, until I passed out, or until I blacked out, which is arguably a pass out. Let me clarify. A blackout is where you're still awake and moving around and doing things, but the next day you have absolutely no recollection of what you did. And I was a frequent blackout drunk. So the second criteria is a continuous desire or failed attempts at moderating or controlling or stopping your drinking. I did try moderating my drinking. I tried to drink less. I tried to drink only on the weekends. I tried to drink only in the evenings. I tried to drink, only in certain situations and not in other situations, with various levels of success. Point 3 is that you spend a lot of time planning, obtaining, or recovering from alcohol, like planning how and when you're going to be able to use alcohol, obtaining your alcohol, or recovering from alcohol. In my case, I can remember back when I was an active alcoholic, they did not sell alcohol in my state on Sundays. And I lived about an hour from state line. And so I would frequently spend 2 hours on a Sunday driving across state lines to try to get alcohol. And I was doing that before I was even legal to buy alcohol. So I would have to convince somebody else to drive along with me and buy the alcohol as well. I'm smiling, but it's not funny. It's just, I've come a long way from that experience. And so I kind of snicker because it's disbelief. I can't believe I did that, right? I would also call in to work frequently because I was either still sick from being drunk the night before, or because I didn't want to wait until I got off work to start drinking again. So that would also fall into criteria number 3. The fourth criteria is about craving, or an urge or a desire to consume alcohol. It's a little different for different people, like what the craving feels like. For me, it was obsessive thoughts. As soon as I started thinking about drinking, it was, when can I get it? How can I get it? How fast can I get it? Where's the money for it? When can I consume it? Where can I consume it? Who can I consume it around to have a good time? Who do I need to stay away from because they're going to bum me out because they don't like the way that I use alcohol? I would have so many thoughts about it. I would be thinking about the next time I was going to use alcohol while I was currently using alcohol. Point number 5 is your continued use of alcohol keeps you from meeting your obligations in life, whatever that role is. My role during my drinking career was high school student, and then it was college student and an employee. I worked all through most of high school and college. And my alcoholism kept me from fulfilling my obligations as an employee. I once had 13 jobs in a 12-month period. This was right before I got sober. Prior to that, I had always been a reliable worker and loyal to my employers, and I would show up, on time all the time, and I would do a good job. I only had 3 employers from the time I was 15 to 19, and most of the time I was working 2 jobs at once. Throughout college, I did work study and had an additional 3 employers while I worked through my college program. And again, during that time, I was usually working multiple part-time jobs. So when it got really bad and I had 13 jobs in 1 year and couldn't even get hired at McDonald's, not to say that McDonald's workers aren't skilled. I'm just saying I had those skills and above and beyond, but they wouldn't even hire me because my work history was so poor. Criteria number 6 is when alcohol interferes in your relationships, whether that's your family, your friends, your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. Toward the end of my drinking career, I had lost most of my friends. They didn't want to babysit me while I was blacked out. They didn't want to make sure that I didn't drown or have alcohol poisoning or worse. And I don't blame them. If you are a friend of mine at the time, I apologize. I'm sure I've probably apologized to you in person, but I sincerely apologize. The time that I was heavy in my drinking career, toward the end of it, I know that my spouse definitely didn't trust me. They thought that every time I blacked out, I was, had a potential to cheat on them. I personally don't feel like I'm a cheater. I was never a cheater. I don't think that I ever cheated. But I guess I get their point. When I'm in a blackout, I don't know what's going on. So maybe they were afraid that something was going to happen. I know I wouldn't have initiated something, but that doesn't mean that I couldn't have gotten taken advantage of. So I definitely get where that concern came from now in hindsight. But at the time, I was like, you're ridiculous, because I didn't see how bad it was until I did. I don't know that I ever cheated my family. I would lie and steal from my family. Criteria number 7 is giving up or reducing social, work, or leisure activities because alcohol wouldn't be appropriate at those particular activities. My rule in my active drinking days was if I couldn't drink there, I wasn't going unless it was mandatory. If it was mandatory, I was drinking before, I was drinking after, and if I could get away with it, I was drinking during. Criteria number 8 is reoccurring use of alcohol in situations where it's dangerous. The most common one I can think of is driving a vehicle, and unfortunately I did drive a vehicle under the influence, and I'm very, very lucky that I didn't hurt anyone, myself, someone else, children. I can't even imagine. I cannot believe that I did those things, but this is what addiction will do to people. One other time that I maybe overconsumed alcohol when it was dangerous was, I remember I frequently would go out on a boat at the local lake with a group of friends and their family, and I drank so much that I fell off the boat. Thankfully, the boat was like ashore. It wasn't docked necessarily, but it was like run up on the beach. And so when I fell out, I just fell out in really shallow water. And the fall kind of got me out of my stupor, at least for a little bit. But yeah, it could have been much worse. It could have been much worse. Area number 9 is continued use of alcohol, even though you know it's causing you physical and mental distress. Toward the end of my career, I was so bad that I would be dry heaving pretty much every morning, until I could get enough enough alcohol in my system, I guess, to settle my stomach, which sounds awful because I never really enjoyed the taste of alcohol. It was a means to, forget, basically. So I would tolerate the alcohol. I would mix it with whatever I could to get it down. Another situation where I was causing myself physical pain was the excess drinking had caused me to, I guess, hold on to water weight, and I was swollen everywhere, and it was just uncomfortable looking, and I didn't have great blood circulation. I would have bruises that I couldn't explain, again from the blackouts, and I didn't know where I got the bruises, but I would have bruises, so I was falling down and hurting myself fairly often. Criterion number 10 is that you have a high tolerance for alcohol. I'm 5'3". At the time, I was anywhere from 120 to 150 pounds, and I could regularly drink 15 beers, and would often have, I don't remember the size of the bottles. I would say it was probably like a pint or a half a pint or half a liter or something. But I would also have like a small bottle of hard alcohol, and I would drink that as well as the beer. And that was pretty regular. Toward the end, it was a daily, pretty daily occurrence, at least 3 times a week, if not more. Criteria number 11 is that you have withdrawal symptoms. Withdrawal symptoms can look different for different people. For me, withdrawal symptoms look like dry heaving, looked like shakes, like tremors in my hand. If I wasn't drinking, it would, kind of tremor like that. And the withdrawal symptoms would go away or diminish as soon as I got a little bit of alcohol in my system. So given those 11 points of criteria, by the end of my drinking career, I scored 11 out of 11. It was pretty quick. By the time I was 16, I was likely scoring 5 out of 11. I honestly just didn't have the maturity to address it, and thankfully I survived from that time to the time that I was able to get sober, which was when I was 23. So out of the criteria, the ones that I very quickly identified with early on in my drinking career were, number 1, the time and the quantity. Number 3, a lot of time and effort spent getting or using or recovering from. Number 4, the craving was there pretty instantaneously. I would say alcohol interfered with my relationships pretty early on. In the beginning, I thought that it was actually helping because people said that they didn't like me, or I was a B word or whatever. They said they didn't like me. I had an attitude. But if I was drinking, then I was fun and they liked me. And so I initially thought that alcohol was actually helping my relationships because it brought me kind of acceptance, but ultimately that's a joke. I probably needed to get better friends is what it came down to. Or I needed to maybe do some work on myself and figure out how to be maybe presenting as a more pleasant person. I still work on that one. So I identified with 7 pretty early on, giving up on social work or leisure activities or reducing the amount of those because you'd rather be drinking or figuring out how you're going to drink. So I don't know if that came up to 5, but yes, those were the ones that I feel like I kind of got immediately. I didn't really attempt to stop drinking early on because I didn't know I had a problem, so that wasn't one that I had early on. Early on in my drinking, I didn't have a problem meeting my obligations. My first drink was at 12, and my last drink was at 23. I would say from 12 to 16, maybe 17, I was pretty clearly fulfilling most of my obligations. Even though I wasn't going to school all the time, I still graduated on time. I continued on to college and was making slow, but making progress in college. So that symptom or that criteria I didn't necessarily meet until later on in my drinking career. I didn't immediately use alcohol in situations where it was dangerous. I say that, but as soon as I said that, because I was using alcohol at such a young age, especially around 14, 15, 16, 17, even though I wasn't putting myself behind the wheel of a car at that time, I was putting myself in situations with strange people that I didn't know, and that was pretty dangerous. So maybe that one I did actually identify with early on, but again, the maturity. I wasn't mature enough to notice that that was a problem until later. I didn't have a high tolerance for alcohol to begin with, and by the time that I realized I had a high tolerance for alcohol, I kind of already knew I had a problem from answering all the other questions. I did not have withdrawal symptoms early on. I didn't use alcohol frequently enough. When I first started drinking, I was 12. My drinking probably escalated 18, 19, 20, especially 20 to 22, 23. That's when it was probably at its worst. And the withdrawal symptoms probably only were within the last year, so 22 to 23. That's my experience and my stories that identify with those 11 criteria based off of the clinical diagnosis method. If you can identify with 2 to 3 of those criteria in the last 12 months, you might have a mild case of alcohol use disorder. If you identify with 4 or 5 of those criteria, you may have a moderate case of alcohol use disorder. If you identify with 6 or more of those criteria, you may have a severe alcohol use disorder. Again, I am not a professional. I am just somebody that has recovered from alcoholism and managed to stay sober for 18 years plus. And I thought sharing my experience might help somebody else. When I looked out on YouTube to see if anybody else had videos out like this, was this an area that had a gap that I could fill? I did notice that there were videos and information, and they were often put out by doctors or clinicians, which is wonderful. I'm glad that there's that information out there. My take is that sometimes for certain people, it's easier to relate to a normal everyday person that isn't necessarily a doctor or a professional. I do happen to go to AA. I follow the 12 steps and the 12 traditions of AA. We can get into that more later if you want to. It's not the only way to get sober. It's not the only way to do it, but it is the way that helps me. It's the way that works for me. I like the community aspect of it. I like to be able to be held accountable by others. And I like talking to everyday real people that are struggling with the same thing that I am. If you like this content and you want to see more like it, please subscribe or comment, like the video below, let me know, and I'll keep making videos like this. I hope this was helpful for you. The best thing that I ever did in my whole life was decide that I wanted to stop drinking. And if you can relate to any of these criteria, you can't even imagine how great life could be once you put the alcohol down. So I wish you the best of luck. Please, if you feel like you suffer from this, speak to a professional. I'll put some links in the description below. Thanks. See you guys. Bye-bye.